The sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Willow Creek as Zara Anderson stepped off the stagecoach, her face set with determination despite the whispers that followed her like vultures. They had called her many things in the town she'd left behind: troublemaker, dreamer, and most painfully, liar. But Zara knew what she'd seen that night at the Silver Dollar Mine, and no amount of ridicule would silence her this time. The year was 1875, and the Wyoming Territory was still wild and untamed, much like the truth Zara carried within her heart. She adjusted her simple blue dress, smoothed back her auburn hair, and grabbed her worn leather satchel. This would be her last chance to prove what she knew: that the Silver Dollar Mine's collapse wasn't an accident, but the result of deliberate tampering that had killed her father and 11 other miners. "Miss Anderson?" a deep voice called out, drawing her attention to a tall man leaning against the hitching post. His worn Stetson was pulled low over his eyes, but she could still make out the strong line of his jaw beneath several days' worth of stubble. "Yes," Zara replied cautiously, her hand instinctively tightening around her satchel. "And who might you be?" The man straightened, revealing broad shoulders beneath a dust-covered denim jacket. "Name's Griffin O'Malley. Sheriff Tate asked me to meet you." He tipped his hat. "Welcome to Willow Creek." Zara studied him, taking in the weathered boots, the worn leather holster at his hip, and the calm, steady gaze that finally met hers. Something about his eyes, deep green and unwaveringly direct, made her pause. They held none of the skepticism or dismissal she'd grown accustomed to seeing. "Thank you, Mr. O'Malley," she said finally, "but I'm perfectly capable of finding my way to the boarding house on my own." A slight smile curved his lips. "No doubt, Miss Anderson, but Willow Creek can be unwelcoming to strangers, especially those with—" He hesitated. "With a reputation?" Zara finished for him, lifting her chin. "I'm quite used to that, Mr. O'Malley." Griffin's smile faded. "I was going to say, especially those with important business regarding the Silver Dollar Mining Company. Word travels fast in these parts." Zara's heart quickened. "Then you know why I'm here?" "I know enough," Griffin replied, reaching for her satchel. "And I know Marshall Mining has powerful friends in this town." When she hesitated to release her bag, he added more softly, "I also know what it's like to speak truths that no one wants to hear." Their fingers brushed as he took her bag, and for the first time in months, Zara felt a flicker of hope that perhaps she'd found an ally in her quest for justice. "My horse is over there." Griffin nodded toward a magnificent chestnut stallion. "We can talk more once you're settled." As they walked toward his horse, neither of them noticed the man watching from the saloon window. His eyes narrowed as he observed their interaction. Samuel Marshall turned to his companion and muttered, "Looks like the Anderson girl's found herself a champion. Make sure O'Malley understands where his loyalties should lie." Willow Creek was the largest settlement near the now infamous Silver Dollar Mine, and though Zara had never visited before, she knew its importance. This was where the mining company's headquarters stood, where the decisions were made, and where her father's death certificate had been signed with barely an investigation. Griffin helped Zara onto his horse before mounting behind her, maintaining a respectful distance as they rode through town. The closeness was uncomfortable for Zara, who had kept her distance from others since her father's death 6 months ago. "The sheriff mentioned you've been to 3 counties already," Griffin said as they rode. "Carson City, Denver, and Cheyenne?" "Yes," Zara answered, her voice tightening. "And in each place, I was laughed out of the office. Nobody wants to challenge the Marshall Mining Company, especially on the word of a woman." Griffin's voice was level when he responded. "What exactly did you see that night, Miss Anderson?" The question startled her. Nobody had asked her so directly before. Most officials had simply dismissed her claims without hearing the details. "I was bringing my father his dinner," she began carefully. "I took the path that runs alongside the mine entrance, the one that overlooks the support beams from above. She paused, the memory still vivid. There were two men there, tampering with the supports, sawing partway through them. I heard one say that Marshall wanted it done that night because they'd hit a new vein, and he didn't want to pay out the promised bonuses. You saw their faces? Griffin asked. No. It was dusk, and they wore bandanas. But I recognized one voice, Luther Keene, Marshall's foreman. She swallowed hard. I ran to warn them, but the collapse happened before I could get there. 12 men died, including my father. Griffin remained silent for a moment. And Marshall's men claimed the collapse was due to your father's negligence as crew leader. Yes. The bitterness in Zara's voice was palpable. They even produced witnesses who said my father had been drinking that day. He never touched a drop in his life. She turned slightly to look at Griffin. Why are you listening to me? No one else has. Griffin guided his horse down a quieter side street. Let's just say I've had my own experiences with Samuel Marshall and his way of doing business. As they approached a neat white building with a sign reading, Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, Griffin dismounted and offered Zara his hand. She hesitated before taking it, surprised by the gentleness of his calloused palm. Mrs. Holloway is expecting you, Griffin said. She's a good woman. Doesn't hold with Marshall's ways. Thank you, Zara said, suddenly aware of how exhausted she felt after the long journey. Will I see you again, Mr. O'Malley? Griffin tied his horse and picked up her satchel. Count on it, Miss Anderson. We'll talk more tomorrow. For now, get some rest. He tipped his hat again before adding, and Zara, in Willow Creek, you're not alone anymore. As Zara watched him walk away, she felt a curious mixture of hope and trepidation. Griffin O'Malley seemed different from the others, but experience had taught her to be wary. Trust was a luxury she could ill afford. Mrs. Mrs. Holloway proved to be a kindly widow in her 60s, who showed Zara to a small but clean room at the back of the house. You'll have privacy here, she explained, and a view of the hills where the wildflowers are just starting to bloom. After a simple supper of vegetable stew and fresh bread, Zara retired to her room. She unpacked her few belongings, including her father's pocket watch, and a small bundle of letters, her evidence, such as it was. As she prepared for bed, a soft knock at her door startled her. Mrs. Holloway stood there with a steaming cup of tea. For your nerves, dear. A young woman traveling alone has plenty to worry about without the burden you're carrying. Zara accepted the tea with surprise. You know why I'm here? Everyone knows why you're here, Mrs. Holloway said gently. Some think you're stirring up trouble. Others. She paused. Others lost people they loved in that mine too. Do you think I'm lying? Zara asked directly. Mrs. Holloway's kind eyes crinkled. I think truth is rarely convenient for the powerful, my dear. And I think Griffin O'Malley wouldn't waste his time with you if he thought you were spinning tales. You know Mr. O'Malley well? Well enough to know he's one of the few honest men left in this town. She patted Zara's hand. Now drink your tea and get some sleep. Tomorrow will be challenging enough. As Zara settled into the unfamiliar bed, her thoughts drifted to Griffin O'Malley. There was something in his manner that suggested he had his own score to settle with Samuel Marshall. She wondered what his story might be, and whether she could truly trust him to stand by her side when the whole town turned against her, as they inevitably would. Morning came, with golden light streaming through her window. Zara dressed carefully in her best-dressed navy blue with a modest white collar. If she was to face the sheriff today, she wanted to appear respectable and composed. She pinned her hair back severely, determined that nothing about her appearance would give anyone reason to dismiss her words. Mrs. Holloway had breakfast waiting: eggs, bacon, and biscuits with honey. Eat up, dear. You'll need your strength. As Zara was finishing her meal, the front door opened and Griffin walked in, nodding respectfully to Mrs. Holloway before turning to Zara. Good morning. I hope you slept well. Well enough, Zara replied, noting that Griffin looked more presentable today in a clean shirt and vest, though his pistol still hung at his hip. "The sheriffs agreed to meet with us at 10, Griffin explained. "I thought we might walk together, give you a chance to see a bit of the town." Zara nodded, grateful for his steady presence. "That would be fine, Mr. O'Malley." "Griffin, please," he said with a slight smile. "If we're going to be allies in this, we might as well use our given names." "Very well," Zara agreed, reaching for her shawl. "Then you must call me Zara." They walked slowly through town, Griffin pointing out various establishments: the general store, the telegraph office, the small church at the end of the street. Zara noticed how people nodded respectfully to Griffin while regarding her with curious, sometimes hostile glances. "They've heard about me," she observed. "News travels fast in small towns," Griffin confirmed, "but don't let it trouble you. What matters is the sheriff hearing your story and taking proper action." As they approached the sheriff's office, Griffin stopped suddenly. "Zara, before we go in, there's something you should know." She turned to him, wary of his serious tone. "Sheriff Tate is an honest man, but he's also practical. Marshall Mining employs half the town. He won't act without solid evidence." "I have my testimony," Zara insisted, "and I wrote down everything I remembered immediately after it happened." Griffin's expression remained somber. "It might not be enough, but I want you to know, whatever happens in there, I believe you." The simple declaration caught Zara off guard. She'd faced so much disbelief and dismissal that Griffin's straightforward support was almost disarming. "Why?" she asked softly. "You don't know me." "I know enough," Griffin replied. His green eyes held hers steadily. "I know grief doesn't make a person invent elaborate lies, and I know Samuel Marshall's reputation." Before Zara could respond, the sheriff's office door opened, and a middle-aged man with a silver star pinned to his vest stepped out. "Miss Anderson?" Sheriff Tate extended his hand. "I've been expecting you. Mr. O'Malley here has been quite insistent about the importance of your visit." Zara shook the sheriff's hand, noting his firm grip and direct gaze. "Thank you for seeing me, Sheriff." "Come on in, both of you," he said, holding the door. "Let's hear what brought you all the way to Willow Creek." Inside, the office was simple but orderly. Sheriff Tate gestured for them to sit in the wooden chairs facing his desk while he settled into his own seat. He pulled out a notebook and pencil. "Now then, Miss Anderson, Griffin here tells me you have information about the Silver Dollar Mine collapse. I'd like to hear your account directly." For the next half hour, Zara recounted her story in careful detail: her visit to the mine that evening, what she'd witnessed, her recognition of Luther Keen's voice, her futile attempt to warn the miners, and the terrible collapse that followed. She described the immediate aftermath: how Marshall's men had quickly taken control of the rescue operation, how her account had been dismissed, and how Samuel Marshall himself had suggested she was hysterical with grief and imagining things. "I went to the authorities in 3 different counties," Zara concluded. "Each time, I was told there wasn't sufficient evidence to investigate further. The official report states that the collapse was due to improper maintenance of the support beams, a responsibility that fell to my father as crew leader." Sheriff Tate had taken notes throughout her account, his expression neutral. When she finished, he set down his pencil and leaned back in his chair. "That's quite a serious accusation, Miss Anderson. You're essentially claiming Samuel Marshall committed murder for profit." "I'm stating what I saw and heard," Zara replied firmly. 12 men died that night, Sheriff. They deserve justice." The sheriff glanced at Griffin, who had remained silent throughout Zara's testimony. "And you, O'Malley, why are you involving yourself in this?" Griffin's jaw tightened slightly. "I have my reasons for believing Miss Anderson's account deserves proper investigation." Sheriff Tate sighed and rubbed his mustache. "The problem, Miss Anderson, is that without corroborating evidence, this remains your word against Marshall's, and he's a powerful man in these parts." So you're dismissing me too, Zara said, disappointment heavy in her voice. I didn't say that, the sheriff corrected her. I'm merely pointing out the difficulties. Luther Keene is still Marshall's foreman. If he was involved as you claim, he's unlikely to confess. And without physical evidence of tampering. What if we could find evidence? Griffin interrupted. The mine has been closed since the collapse, hasn't it? It has, Sheriff Tate confirmed. Marshall says he's planning to reopen it next month, once new support beams are installed. Then the evidence might still be there, Griffin suggested. The partially sawn beams would show marks of deliberate tampering, distinct from a natural break. Sheriff Tate considered this. Possibly, but Marshall's men guard that site day and night. Says it's to prevent looting, but more likely it's to keep curious eyes away. If we could get into that mine, Zara said, leaning forward, we could prove I'm telling the truth. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. I can't authorize a trespassing expedition based solely on your testimony, Miss Anderson. My jurisdiction only extends so far, and my badge doesn't give me the right to search private property without cause. Griffin stood up. Thank you for your time, Sheriff. We understand your position. Zara opened her mouth to protest, but Griffin placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, silently urging her to follow his lead. Reluctantly, she stood as well. Sheriff Tate rose with them. I'm not dismissing your concerns, Miss Anderson, but I need more than one witness account to take action against the most powerful man in the territory. Outside, Zara could barely contain her frustration. So that's it? Another dead end? Griffin took her elbow and guided her away from the sheriff's office, lowering his voice. Not exactly. Sheriff Tate said what he had to say officially, but he also gave us useful information. The mine is guarded but still intact, and Marshall plans to reopen it soon. Zara looked at him in surprise. You're suggesting we go to the mine ourselves? That would be trespassing. It would, Griffin agreed, his expression serious. And it could be dangerous. But if the evidence is still there... Why would you risk that for me? Zara asked, searching his face. Griffin's gaze drifted toward the distant hills where the mine was located. 2 years ago, my brother worked that same mine. There was a smaller cave in Not Fatal, but several men were injured, including my brother. He reported unsafe conditions to Marshall, who fired him the next day. His voice hardened. A month later, my brother was found dead behind the saloon. Drunken accident, they called it. But Thomas rarely drank, and he'd been asking questions about Marshall's business practices. Understanding dawned on Zara. You think Marshall was responsible? I couldn't prove it, Griffin said quietly. Any more than you can prove what you saw. But I've been watching Marshall since then, waiting for a chance to expose him. He met her eyes directly. Your testimony might be that chance. Zara felt a connection with Griffin that went beyond their shared suspicion of Marshall. They had both lost family, both been dismissed when seeking justice. If we're going to do this, she said, her voice steadying with resolve, we need a plan. Griffin nodded, a hint of admiration in his eyes. I know someone who worked security at the mine. He might have information about the guard rotations, maybe even a map of the tunnels. As they walked back toward Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, Zara became aware of eyes following them, townsfolk watching with curiosity and suspicion. One man in particular, standing outside the general store, stared at them with undisguised hostility. Who is that? Zara whispered to Griffin. Luther Keene, Griffin replied without turning his head. Marshall's foreman. Zara's heart raced. The man she'd identified as one of the saboteurs was watching them, which meant he likely knew why she was in town. He recognizes me, she murmured. Then we need to move quickly, Griffin said. Marshall will be expecting you to cause trouble. That afternoon, while Zara stayed at the boarding house reviewing her notes and evidence, Griffin went to meet his contact, a former security guard named Emmett Wilson, who had left Marshall's employment after being injured on the job. Emmett now ran the livery stable on the edge of town, keeping his distance from his former employer. When Griffin returned, his expression was grim but determined. He found Zara in Mrs. Holloway's small parlor, where she'd been writing in her journal. Emmett says there are 2 guards at night, one at the main entrance, and one who patrols the perimeter, Griffin explained in a low voice, mindful of potential listeners. The guard change happens at midnight. There's about 10 minutes between when the day guards leave and the night guards take their positions. So we go tonight, Zara said, determination in her voice. Griffin nodded. I'll come for you at 11:30. Wear dark clothing and bring a small lantern if you have one. I don't, Zara admitted. I'll bring 2 then. He hesitated before adding, Zara, are you certain about this? If we're caught, the consequences could be severe, especially for you. She met his gaze without wavering. I've spent 6 months being called a liar and watching my father's reputation be destroyed. I'm certain. Griffin studied her face for a moment, then nodded once more. I'll see you tonight. The hours until nightfall stretched interminably. Zara tried to rest, knowing she would need her strength, but sleep eluded her. She thought about her father, his kind eyes, his booming laugh, his unwavering honesty. He had taught her to stand up for truth, no matter the cost. She wouldn't let his memory be tarnished by Marshall's lies. When the clock downstairs chimed 11, Zara changed into her darkest dress and boots. She braided her hair tightly and wrapped a dark shawl around her shoulders. At precisely 11:30, she heard a soft tap at her window. Griffin stood below, dressed in black, his face partially obscured by his hat. He helped her climb down using the trellis that ran alongside the boarding house, his hands steady and sure as he guided her to the ground. Ready? He whispered. Zara nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. They moved through town like shadows, avoiding the main streets where late-night revelers might spot them. Griffin had 2 horses waiting behind the livery stable, a thoughtful precaution, as Zara realized they would need to move quickly once they had their evidence. The ride to the Silver Dollar Mine took nearly an hour, following narrow trails through the foothills. The night was clear, with a half moon providing just enough light to see the path. As they approached the mine, Griffin signaled for them to dismount and tether the horses in a small grove of trees. We'll approach on foot from here, he whispered. Stay low and follow my lead. The Silver Dollar Mine entrance was built into the hillside, its wooden framework stark against the dark rock. A single lantern burned outside the entrance, where a guard sat on a crate, occasionally taking swigs from a flask. Griffin and Zara crouched behind a large boulder, watching as the minutes ticked by. Just as Griffin had predicted, at midnight the guard stood, stretched, and walked away down the path toward town, presumably heading home after his shift. Now, Griffin whispered, we have 10 minutes at most. They moved swiftly across the open ground to the mine entrance. Griffin lit one of the small lanterns he'd brought, adjusting it to emit minimal light, then handed it to Zara. He kept the second lantern unlit as a reserve. The mine entrance smelled of damp earth and old timber. Zara hesitated at the threshold, memories of her father flooding back how he would smell of this same earthy scent when he returned home each evening. Are you all right? Griffin asked softly. Zara nodded, swallowing hard. Yes. Let's go. They moved carefully into the tunnel, the small lantern casting eerie shadows on the rock walls. Griffin consulted the rough map Emmett had drawn for him, guiding them toward the section where the collapse had occurred. According to Emmett, they've cleared some of the debris, but they haven't fully repaired this section yet, Griffin explained. The compromised support beams should still be visible. The tunnel narrowed as they proceeded, the air growing thicker and harder to breathe. Zara's chest tightened, not just from the poor air quality, but from the knowledge that she was walking where her father had died. After several minutes, they reached a junction where the tunnel split in two directions. Griffin checked the map again. "This way," he said, pointing to the right passage. The collapse happened about 50 yards ahead. They moved more slowly now, as the floor was uneven with debris. Suddenly, Griffin held up his hand, signaling Zara to stop. He pointed to the ceiling, where several support beams were visible, or what remained of them. Zara raised the lantern higher. The beams had indeed broken, but not in the way natural pressure would cause. Several showed clear signs of having been partially sawn through before snapping. "There," she whispered, her voice tight with vindication and grief. "That's what I saw them doing. They weakened the beams so they would collapse when the night shift was fully underway." Griffin examined the cuts carefully. These were definitely made deliberately. The cut pattern is too clean for natural splitting. He pulled out a small knife and carefully collected some wood shavings, wrapping them in a handkerchief as evidence. "We need to document exactly where these beams are located." Zara was already making notes in a small notebook she'd brought, sketching the layout and marking the location of the tampered beams. "If we show this to Sheriff Tate—" A sudden noise from behind them made them both freeze. Footsteps echoed in the tunnel, accompanied by the glow of approaching lantern light. "Someone's coming," Griffin whispered urgently. "The night guard must have arrived early." He quickly extinguished their lantern. "This way." He grabbed Zara's hand and pulled her deeper into the tunnel, away from the approaching light. They stumbled through the darkness until they reached a small alcove carved into the rock wall, perhaps once used for storage. Griffin pulled Zara into the confined space, their bodies pressed close together as they tried to make themselves invisible in the shadows. The footsteps grew louder, and then a voice called out, "I know someone's in here. Show yourself." Zara's heart pounded so loudly she was certain it would give them away. Griffin's arm tightened protectively around her shoulders, and she could feel the tension in his body as he prepared to defend them if necessary. The guard moved slowly, sweeping his lantern across the tunnel. "Marshall said someone might try to sneak in. Come out now, and maybe I won't shoot." For a terrifying moment, the lantern light swept across their hiding place, but the guard didn't spot them in the deep shadows. He continued past their alcove, moving deeper into the tunnel. "We need to go," Griffin breathed against Zara's ear. "Now." While he's moving away. They slipped out of the alcove and began making their way back toward the entrance, moving as quietly as possible in the darkness. Griffin kept one hand on the tunnel wall for guidance, the other holding tightly to Zara's hand. They had nearly reached the junction when they heard the guard shout behind them. "Hey, stop right there. Run!" Griffin urged, pulling Zara forward as they abandoned stealth for speed. They raced through the tunnels, the guards' footsteps pounding behind them. As they burst out of the mine entrance, Griffin quickly oriented himself and led Zara not toward their horses, which would be too obvious, but into a stand of trees in the opposite direction. They crouched among the undergrowth, breathing hard as the guard emerged from the mine. He fired a warning shot into the air, the sound echoing across the hills. "That'll bring the other guards," Griffin whispered. "We need to circle back to the horses." Moving stealthily through the trees, they made a wide arc around the mine property. Behind them, they could hear shouts as more men arrived, presumably responding to the gunshot. When they finally reached their horses, Griffin helped Zara mount quickly before swinging into his own saddle. "We'll take the long way back," he said, "through the creek bed to mask our tracks." They rode hard through the night, the evidence of Marshall's sabotage secure in Griffin's pocket. Only when they were several miles from the mine did they slow their pace, confident they weren't being pursued. "We did it," Zara said, breathless with relief and lingering fear. "We have proof." Griffin's expression was grave in the moonlight. "We do, but that gunshot will have alerted the whole town. By morning, Marshall will know someone was in the mine." "Then we need to go directly to Sheriff Tate at first light," Zara insisted. "Before Marshall can cover his tracks or create some explanation." Griffin nodded. We'll go together. When they reached the edge of town, the streets were quiet. It was well past 2 in the morning, and even the saloon was dark. Griffin escorted Zara back to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, helping her climb back up to her window. Before she slipped inside, he caught her hand. Zara, no matter what happens tomorrow, I want you to know I'm proud of what you've done. It takes courage to stand up for the truth when everyone calls you a liar. In the pale moonlight, his face was earnest and open, his eyes reflecting a sincerity that touched something deep within Zara. On impulse, she leaned forward and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. "Thank you for believing me," she whispered, then disappeared through her window. Inside her room, Zara couldn't sleep despite her exhaustion. Her mind kept replaying what they'd found and what it meant. Justice for her father was finally within reach. And then there was Griffin, his steadfast support, his gentle strength, the way he'd held her protectively in that dark alcove. Morning came too quickly. Zara dressed with care, choosing her most respectable outfit for what she hoped would be the day Samuel Marshall finally faced consequences for his actions. She had just finished pinning her hair when a frantic knock sounded at her door. Mrs. Holloway stood there, her face pale with worry. "Zara, dear, there are men downstairs, the sheriff and some others. They're asking for you." Zara's heart sank. Had they been seen after all? "I'll be right down," she said, gathering her courage. In the parlor, Sheriff Tate stood with 2 deputies and, to Zara's dismay, Luther Keene. The foreman's face wore a smug expression that made her stomach clench with foreboding. "Miss Anderson," Sheriff Tate said formally, "I'm afraid I need to ask you some questions about your whereabouts last night." Before Zara could respond, the front door burst open and Griffin strode in, his expression thunderous. "What's going on here, Sheriff?" "Ah, Mr. O'Malley," the sheriff said, unsurprised. "I was about to ask Miss Anderson about a break-in at the Silver Dollar Mine last night. Perhaps you'd like to join this conversation?" "There was no break-in," Luther Keene interrupted. "It was trespassing and theft. Valuable ore samples were taken." Zara gasped. "That's a lie. We didn't take any ore." Too late. She realized her mistake. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "So you admit you were at the mine last night?" Griffin stepped forward. "Sheriff, we went to the mine to gather evidence of deliberate sabotage. Evidence that proves Miss Anderson's account of what happened the night of the collapse." "Convenient story," Keene sneered. "But we found footprints leading right to where our gold samples were stored." "We were nowhere near any gold," Zara protested. "We were examining the support beams that were tampered with before the collapse." Sheriff Tate held up his hand. "These are serious accusations on both sides. Miss Anderson, Mr. O'Malley, I'm going to have to ask you both to come down to my office to make formal statements." "Are we under arrest?" Griffin asked bluntly. The sheriff hesitated. "Not at this time, but I need to investigate these claims properly." As they walked to the sheriff's office, Griffin managed to whisper to Zara, "Say nothing about the evidence until we're alone with the sheriff. Marshall's trying to discredit us before we can present it." The sheriff's office was crowded when they arrived. Samuel Marshall himself was there, a tall, imposing man in an expensive suit, his silver hair and beard immaculately groomed. His cold eyes assessed Zara with undisguised contempt. "So, this is the troublemaking Anderson girl," he said dismissively. "Still spinning tales about my mine, I see." Sheriff Tate cleared his throat. "Mr. Marshall, please. This is an official investigation now." "Investigation?" Marshall scoffed. "These 2 broke into my property and stole valuable ore samples. That's not a matter for investigation, it's a clear case for arrest." "We stole nothing," Griffin stated firmly, "but we did find evidence that the mine collapse was not an accident." Marshall's face darkened. "Preposterous. The collapse was thoroughly investigated and ruled accidental due to improper maintenance, the responsibility of her father." He jabbed a finger toward Zara. My father was a careful man, Zara said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. He would never have neglected safety measures. The sheriff moved to his desk. Let's all calm down. I need to take statements from everyone involved. He looked at the crowded room. Mr. Marshall, Mr. Keene, I'll speak with you first. Miss Anderson and Mr. O'Malley, please wait outside. As they stepped onto the boardwalk outside the sheriff's office, Griffin turned to Zara. This is Marshall's play, accuse us of theft to undermine our credibility before we can present the evidence. But we have the wood shavings, Zara reminded him, and our drawings of where the beams were tampered with. Griffin nodded, but his expression remained worried. It might not be enough. It's still our word against Marshall's, and he has influence with nearly everyone in town. They waited in tense silence until the sheriff called them back inside. Marshall and Keene were leaving, both wearing satisfied expressions that made Zara's heart sink. Sheriff Tate gestured for them to sit. Mr. Marshall has formally accused you both of trespassing and theft. He's demanding your arrest. Sheriff, before you make any decisions, you need to see this, Griffin said, pulling out the handkerchief containing the wood shavings and the notebook with their sketches. He explained what they'd found, the deliberately cut support beams that matched exactly what Zara had witnessed months ago. The sheriff examined the evidence with a frown. This is concerning, I'll grant you that. But it's not conclusive proof of Marshall's involvement. It proves the collapse wasn't an accident, Zara insisted. It proves I was telling the truth about what I saw. Sheriff Tate sighed heavily. Miss Anderson, even if the beams were tampered with, this evidence doesn't directly implicate Marshall or Keene, and the fact remains that you two trespassed on private property. So you're going to arrest us? Griffin asked quietly. I should, the sheriff admitted, but I'm not going to, not yet. Marshall wants immediate action, but I told him I need time to investigate properly. He fixed them both with a stern look. However, I can't have you leaving town. Consider yourselves restricted to Willow Creek until this matter is resolved. Relief washed over Zara. It wasn't a complete victory, but at least they weren't being thrown in jail. Thank you, Sheriff. Don't thank me yet, Sheriff Tate warned. Marshall is a powerful enemy to make, and if those ore samples don't turn up, I may have no choice but to make arrests. As they left the sheriff's office, Griffin's expression was troubled. Marshall's framing us. Those ore samples, if they even exist, were probably taken by his own men. What do we do now? Zara asked, feeling the weight of their situation. We need more evidence, Griffin said decisively. Something that directly ties Marshall or Keene to the sabotage. He thought for a moment. There has to be someone else who knows something, someone who might be willing to talk. They spent the rest of the day seeking potential allies. Griffin knew several former miners who had worked for Marshall, but most were reluctant to speak against their former employer. Fear of retribution kept many silent. By evening, they had made little progress. Griffin escorted Zara back to the boarding house, both of them weary and discouraged. Don't lose hope, Griffin said as they stood on the porch. We've come this far. We'll find a way to prove your story. Zara looked up at him, struck again by his unwavering support. Why do you have such faith in me, Griffin? Most men would have walked away by now. Griffin's gaze softened as he looked at her. Because I recognize truth when I hear it. And because... He hesitated, then continued more quietly. Because I've come to care about what happens to you, Zara. The simple admission sent warmth spreading through Zara's chest. Despite everything, the accusations, the danger, the uncertainty, she felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. Hope, not just for justice, but for something more personal. I care about you too, she admitted softly, more than I expected to. Griffin's hand gently touched her cheek, and for a moment Zara thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stepped back, his expression becoming serious once more. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow we'll try a different approach." That night, Zara dreamed of her father. In the dream, he was showing her something important, a small book he kept hidden in his boot. When she awoke with a start, the memory came rushing back. Her father's journal. He had always kept a small notebook in which he recorded daily observations about the mine conditions, progress, concerns. After his death, Zara had packed his belongings but hadn't gone through them thoroughly, too overwhelmed by grief. At breakfast, she told Griffin about the journal. "It might still be among his things at my aunt's house in Carson City." "That's a 3-day ride from here," Griffin pointed out, "and the sheriff ordered us to stay in town." Zara's face fell. "You're right. And even if we could go, there's no guarantee the journal would contain anything useful." Griffin was silent for a moment, thinking. What if we didn't have to go? Is there someone who could look for it and bring it to us? Zara brightened. "My aunt. I could telegraph her. Ask her to search Father's trunk for the journal and send it by the next stage." They went immediately to the telegraph office. Zara composed a careful message to her aunt, explaining what they needed without revealing too much that might be intercepted. As they left the telegraph office, they noticed Luther Keene watching them from across the street. His eyes narrowed suspiciously. "He's reporting our every move to Marshall," Griffin said quietly. "We need to be careful." They spent the day gathering what support they could in town. Mrs. Holloway introduced them to several widows of miners who had died in the collapse, women who believed Zara's account but had been too frightened to say so publicly. One of them, Mrs. Ryder, whose husband had been my father's close friend, revealed something important. The day before the collapse, my William came home worried, said there was talk among Marshall's security men about making an example of troublemakers. William had been helping your father document safety violations. This confirmed what Zara had long suspected, that her father had been specifically targeted because he was planning to report Marshall to the territorial mining inspector. That evening, a messenger brought news that Sheriff Tate wanted to see them first thing in the morning. Zara and Griffin exchanged worried glances, wondering what this summons might mean. They met outside the sheriff's office at dawn, both tense with anticipation. Inside, Sheriff Tate looked troubled. "I've been pressured to arrest you both," he said without preamble. "Marshall has the town council and the territorial judge demanding action." Zara's heart sank. "And will you?" The sheriff sighed heavily. "Not yet. I've been doing my own investigating since you brought me those wood samples. Something doesn't add up in Marshall's story." He leaned forward. "But I need more time, and I can't give you much protection if Marshall decides to take matters into his own hands." "What are you suggesting?" Griffin asked. "Lie low," the sheriff advised. "Stay out of sight as much as possible until I can build a stronger case." As they left the sheriff's office, the mood in town seemed to have shifted. People who had previously been merely curious now glared openly at Zara. Someone had written "liar" across the boardwalk in front of Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. "It's getting dangerous," Griffin observed grimly. "Marshall's turning the town against you." "Against us," Zara corrected him. "You're as much a target now as I am." Griffin took her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "We knew this wouldn't be easy. But we're close to the truth. I can feel it." 3 days passed in tense waiting. Zara stayed mostly in the boarding house, while Griffin cautiously made inquiries around town, trying to build support. On the 4th day, a telegram arrived from Zara's aunt. She had found the journal and sent it on the morning stage. It would arrive the next day. That night, as Zara was preparing for bed, she heard a commotion downstairs. Rushing to her door, she listened as Mrs. Holloway argued with someone. "You have no right to barge in here," the landlady was saying. "This is my property." "We have every right," came Luther Keene's harsh voice. "We have reason to believe stolen property is being concealed here." Zara's blood ran cold. They were searching for the non-existent ore samples, or using that as an excuse to intimidate her. She quickly gathered her notes and evidence, stuffing them into her pocket. Then she slipped out her window and down the trellis, just as heavy footsteps started up the stairs. She ran through the darkened backyard, not sure where to go. Griffin's lodgings at the hotel would be the first place they'd look for her. The sheriff? Could she trust him to protect her now? A hand suddenly grabbed her arm from the shadows, and Zara nearly screamed before recognizing Griffin's familiar outline. "I saw them heading for the boarding house," he whispered urgently. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she breathed, relieved beyond measure to see him. "But they're searching my room. They'll know I've fled." "Come with me," Griffin said, leading her through back alleys until they reached the livery stable. Emmett Wilson was waiting, looking nervous. "You can hide in the hayloft," he told them. "Not comfortable, but safe for tonight." Griffin thanked him, then helped Zara climb the ladder to the loft. The space was cramped and dusty, but hidden from casual view. They settled into the hay, sitting close together for warmth as the night air grew chilly. "The journal arrives tomorrow," Zara whispered. "If it contains what I hope it does, then we'll have the evidence we need," Griffin finished. "But Marshall's getting desperate. That search wasn't legal, the sheriff wouldn't have authorized it." They fell silent, listening to the occasional sounds of horses below. Despite the discomfort and danger, Zara felt strangely at peace with Griffin beside her. In the dim light filtering through the cracks in the stable wall, she studied his profile, the strong jaw, the thoughtful eyes, the mouth that could be both stern and gentle. As if sensing her gaze, Griffin turned to look at her. "You should try to sleep," he said softly. "I'm not sure I can," Zara admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see my father's face. He trusted the system, believed that truth would always prevail if you just stood by it." Her voice caught. "I want to believe that too." Griffin's arm slipped around her shoulders, drawing her closer. "Your father was right. Truth does prevail, but sometimes it needs champions willing to fight for it." His voice lowered. "You are the bravest champion I've ever known, Zara Anderson." The sincerity in his words moved her deeply. In that moment, surrounded by danger yet feeling utterly safe in his embrace, Zara recognized the truth of her own heart. Despite having known Griffin for less than a week, she had fallen in love with him, with his integrity, his courage, his unwavering faith in her. She turned her face up to his, and this time, when their eyes met, neither looked away. Griffin's hand gently cradled her cheek, and then he was kissing her, a tender, questioning kiss that deepened as she responded. In the midst of chaos and danger, they found a moment of perfect clarity and connection. When they finally separated, Griffin rested his forehead against hers. "When this is over," he whispered, "when you've cleared your father's name and Marshall has faced justice, would you consider staying in Willow Creek?" The question caught Zara by surprise. She had been so focused on proving her father's innocence that she hadn't thought beyond that goal. "You want me to stay?" Griffin's fingers interlaced with hers. "I want a chance to court you properly, without danger hanging over our heads, to see if what I'm feeling for you could grow into something lasting." Hope blossomed in Zara's heart. "I'd like that very much," she whispered, and was rewarded with another gentle kiss. They eventually dozed off, still holding each other close in the hayloft. Morning came too quickly, bringing with it the reminder of the challenges they still faced. Emmett brought them breakfast and news the sheriff had intervened when he learned of the illegal search, but Marshall was now openly accusing Zara of fleeing because she was guilty. "The stage arrives at noon," Griffin said, checking his pocket watch. "We need to get that journal without being seen." They formulated a plan. Emmett would meet the stage and collect the package from Zara's aunt, then bring it to them at their new hiding place, an abandoned trapper's cabin outside town that Griffin knew about from his earlier days exploring the area. By mid-afternoon, they were settled in the small cabin, anxiously waiting for Emmett. When he finally arrived, his expression was grim. There was no package on the stage, he reported. The driver said a man claimed it earlier, said he was authorized to collect it for Miss Anderson. Zara's heart sank. Marshall's men intercepted it. If they have the journal, Griffin began, then stopped, his expression hardening with determination. We need to get it back. If your father documented his concerns about the mine safety, that journal could be the evidence we need. But how? Zara asked. We don't even know who has it or where it is now. Emmett cleared his throat. Actually, I might have an idea about that. Luther Keene was at the stage depot this morning. I saw him tucking a small package into his coat before riding out to Marshall's estate. Marshall's estate was a large ranch house about 2 miles outside of town, a fortress-like property with armed guards patrolling the grounds. Breaking in would be nearly impossible. We need help, Griffin decided. It's time to bring the sheriff fully into our confidence. They sent Emmett to request Sheriff Tate meet them secretly at the cabin. When he arrived that evening, his expression was grave. You two have stirred up a hornet's nest, he said without preamble. Marshall's demanding I organize a search party to find you. Says you're fugitives now. We're not running from the law, Zara replied firmly. We're running from Marshall's corruption. And now he's stolen evidence that could prove my father's innocence. They explained about the journal and their suspicion that Keene had intercepted it. The sheriff listened carefully, his frown deepening. If what you're saying is true, and that journal contains documentation of safety concerns before the collapse, it would substantiate your claim that your father wasn't negligent. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. It might even suggest motive for Marshall to want him silenced. Will you help us recover it? Griffin asked directly. Sheriff Tate considered for a long moment. I can't legally search Marshall's property without evidence that a crime has been committed there. Zara's hopes began to fade, but then the sheriff continued. However, I can invite myself out there on official business, say, to update him on the search for you two. While I'm there, I might notice something suspicious that would justify a more thorough investigation. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was something. The sheriff would visit Marshall the next morning, while Griffin and Zara remained hidden at the cabin, waiting anxiously for news. The day passed with excruciating slowness. By sunset, they were beginning to fear the worst when they heard approaching hoofbeats. Griffin reached for his pistol, but relaxed when he saw it was Sheriff Tate. The sheriff's expression was unreadable as he dismounted and entered the cabin. Marshall wasn't there, he reported. But I spoke with his housekeeper. Seems Marshall and Keene left suddenly this morning headed for Denver, she thinks. Denver, Zara echoed. Why would they go there now? My guess? They're running, Sheriff Tate said. Word came in this morning that the territorial mining inspector is on his way to Willow Creek to investigate the Silver Dollar mine collapse. Apparently, someone sent him copies of some very interesting documents. Griffin and Zara exchanged puzzled glances. We didn't contact the inspector, Griffin said. The sheriff smiled slightly. No, but I did after our first conversation. I may have been cautious about taking action against Marshall without more evidence, but that doesn't mean I wasn't doing my own investigating. Hope surged through Zara. So the inspector is coming? Will he reopen the investigation? He's already reopened it, Sheriff Tate confirmed. And with Marshall suddenly leaving town, it certainly makes him look guilty. He paused. But without that journal or a direct witness willing to testify against Marshall, it might still be difficult to prove criminal intent. Griffin's expression was thoughtful. If Marshall and Keene fled to Denver, they must have taken the journal with them. He turned to Zara. Did your father know anyone else at the mine who might have been aware of his safety concerns? Someone who might be willing to testify now that Marshall's grip on the town is weakening? Zara thought hard, then suddenly remembered something. There was a young engineer, Daniel Fletcher. He was new, but my father trusted him. They worked together documenting the safety violations. Her face fell. But he left town right after the collapse. I don't know where he went. Sheriff Tate's eyes lit up with recognition. Fletcher? Thin fellow? Spectacles? He's in Boulder now, working for the Consolidated Mining Company. I checked on him when I started looking into your claims. Could you telegraph him? Zara asked eagerly. Ask him to come testify? The sheriff nodded. I'll send the telegram tonight. But in the meantime, I think it's safe for you two to come back to town. With Marshall gone, his influence is already waning. They returned to Willow Creek that evening, Zara to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, and Griffin to his room at the hotel. The town seemed different somehow, as if a shadow had been lifted. People who had previously avoided Zara now nodded respectfully, or even offered tentative smiles. The next morning, Griffin came to escort Zara to breakfast at the town's small cafe. As they walked down the main street, he took her hand openly, no longer concerned about being seen together. Sheriff Tate received a reply from Daniel Fletcher, he told her. He's coming on tomorrow's stage, says he has his own documentation that might help our case. Zara squeezed his hand, hardly daring to believe they might actually succeed. And the mining inspector? Arriving today, Griffin replied. The sheriff's arranged for us to meet with him this afternoon. The inspector, a stern-faced man named Howard Jenkins, listened carefully to Zara's account of what she had witnessed the night of the collapse. He examined the wood samples Griffin had collected and reviewed their sketches of the damaged support beams. I've been suspicious of Marshall's operations for some time, Jenkins admitted, but he's always managed to block official investigations. This time, however, he won't escape scrutiny. The following day, Daniel Fletcher arrived as promised. He was exactly as Zara remembered, earnest, scholarly, and visibly nervous about the role he was being asked to play. But his testimony proved invaluable. I kept copies of all the reports your father and I prepared, he told Zara, producing a folder of documents. Safety violations, structural concerns, everything. We were planning to submit them to Inspector Jenkins the week after the collapse happened. His voice softened with regret. I was a coward. After your father died, Marshall threatened me. I left town instead of fighting for the truth. You're here now, Zara assured him. That's what matters. With Fletcher's documentation, the inspector had enough evidence to officially rule that the mine collapse had been the result of deliberate sabotage, not negligence. Sheriff Tate issued warrants for the arrest of Samuel Marshall and Luther Keene on multiple counts of murder. A week passed with no sign of the fugitives. Zara began to fear they might never be brought to justice. But then news came that Marshall and Keene had been apprehended in Denver, attempting to book passage on a train bound for San Francisco. They'll be brought back to Willow Creek to stand trial, Sheriff Tate informed them, and they had your father's journal in their possession when they were arrested. The journal, when recovered, proved to be the final piece of evidence they needed. In it, Zara's father had meticulously documented not only the safety concerns, but also threats made against him by Marshall and Keene when he refused to overlook dangerous conditions in the mine. The day the prisoners were due to arrive from Denver, the whole town gathered to witness their return. Zara stood beside Griffin on the boardwalk, his arm protectively around her shoulders as the prison wagon rolled into town. Marshall, once so powerful and imposing, looked diminished in handcuffs. His eyes burned with hatred as they fell on Zara, but she met his gaze steadily, no longer afraid. They called you a liar, Griffin said softly beside her, but you never wavered from the truth. I couldn't have done it without you, Zara replied, turning to look up at him. You stood beside me when no one else would. As the prisoners were led into the jailhouse, a spontaneous cheer erupted from the crowd. It was as much a celebration of Zara's vindication as it was relief that Marshall's corrupt influence over the town was finally broken. In the days that followed, Willow Creek began to heal. The widows of the miners who had died received compensation from Marshall's seized assets. The mine was purchased by a company committed to proper safety standards, and Daniel Fletcher was appointed the new mine engineer, tasked with ensuring such a tragedy never happened again. For Zara, the most profound healing came in quieter moments walking with Griffin along the creek that gave the town its name, helping Mrs. Holloway tend her garden, receiving letters from other towns where her story had spread, inspiring others to stand up against corruption. One evening, as the setting sun painted the western sky in brilliant golds and reds, Griffin took Zara riding to a beautiful overlook above the town. There, with the valleys spread out below them and the distant mountains etched against the horizon, he asked her properly if she would make Willow Creek her permanent home as his wife. "I know it hasn't been long," he said, holding both her hands in his, "but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love your courage, your determination, your unwavering commitment to truth. And if you'll have me, I promise to stand beside you through whatever life brings us next." Zara's answer was in her shining eyes even before she spoke. "Yes," she said simply, "this is where I belong now with you." Their wedding, held in the town's small church 2 months later, was attended by nearly everyone in Willow Creek. Sheriff Tate gave the bride away, and Mrs. Holloway wept happy tears from the front pew. Even Daniel Fletcher, now settled into his new position at the mine, attended with his young wife. As Griffin and Zara exchanged their vows, promising to love and honor each other through all of life's joys and sorrows, Zara felt her father's presence. He would have approved of Griffin a man who valued truth and justice as much as he had, who had the courage to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. After the ceremony, as they greeted their well-wishers, an elderly miner who had known Zara's father approached them. "Your pa would be mighty proud," he told Zara, his weathered face creased in a smile. "Not just because you cleared his name, but because you found yourself a good man who knows the value of standing by his woman." "Thank you," Zara said, blinking back tears. "That means a great deal to me." Later, as they danced together at their wedding celebration, Griffin held Zara close and whispered, "No matter what challenges come our way, I'll always stand beside you." "And I'll always speak the truth," Zara replied, resting her head against his chest, "even if the whole world calls me a liar." In the years that followed, Zara and Griffin built a life together in Willow Creek. Griffin eventually became sheriff when Tate retired, continuing the older man's tradition of honest law enforcement. Zara, drawing on her experience, became an advocate for mining safety regulations throughout the territory, her once maligned testimony now sought after by officials working to reform the industry. They had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, all raised to value truth and justice above all else. And when their children asked about how their parents met, they would tell the story of a woman who refused to be silenced and a cowboy who believed her when no one else would. The Silver Dollar Mine eventually closed for good, but the town of Willow Creek prospered under new leadership, free from Marshall's corrupt influence. And on quiet evenings, when Griffin and Zara sat on their porch watching the sunset, they would sometimes speak of those dangerous days when they first met and marvel at how the pursuit of truth had led them not only to justice, but to a love that would last a lifetime. As their life together unfolded, they faced other challenges, other moments when standing for truth required courage. But they faced them together, drawing strength from each other and from the knowledge that even when the path of honesty was difficult, it was always right. And in Willow Creek, their story became a legend not just about justice prevailing over corruption, but about a love born in adversity, strengthened by shared purpose, and sustained by unwavering faith in each other. They were living proof that when someone calls you a liar for speaking the truth, finding just one person who stands beside you anyway can change everything.